we do have a scholarship winner. Thank you. I'm going to send around for you guys. And then Bruce, do you have a announcement?
I just have a Medecus update. So the Medecus volleyball tournament is right around the corner. So it starts Monday, September 13th. So it's 3 nights. It's the 13th, 14th, and 16th here in Beashers. It'll be at SCC and the high school. And our responsibility for the volleyball tournament is just to take tickets. And we also prepare the program. So Christina Lyons has volunteered to prepare the program again and get those printed off for us. And then we have to take tickets at the door, and I've got a sign-up sheet I'll start passing around, and Ron said he would manage this over the next couple of meetings here. So I'll start this around the tables here. And then the third thing that I'm not sure about yet, and there's a meeting a week from today that I'll find out, is the hospitality rooms. In the past, we've been responsible for that. I know with SEC, they have some requirements that we have to use a caterer that's on site there. So I need to learn more about that, but I'll learn about that next week at this meeting with that association. But anyway, the sign-up sheet, I'll pass this around, and if you could put your name on there just to take tickets. Okay, thank you.
Nathan Harris. I'm the interim executive director of the American Historical Society of Germans from Russia in Lincoln. Currently at 631 D Street. It's down in the South Bottoms. The reason there's actually 2 bottoms in Lincoln, the North and the South Bottoms. Both were primarily settled by Germans from Russia. Originally, they were put there because they were considered to be not prime real estate, because apparently the locals thought that all the Germans from Russia coming in were actually Russians. And for that name, both are referred to as the Russian Bottoms. The reason they called it the Bottoms was because, and the reason why it was not considered prime real estate, is they used to flood them on purpose. So they kind of had it both ways, both during World War II and the Cold War eras, because during World War II they were suspected because they were Germans. In the Cold Wars, it was suspected because everyone thought they were Russians. Like I said, I'm just going to give a kind of a basic overview of just the impact that Germans from Russia have had, kind of locally, but just kind of also a kind of a history, because you can't really understand their impact with the United States if you don't understand the overall story. Originally, there was a German princess named Catherine. Everyone called her Sophie. She was originally from Germany, but she ended up marrying the Tsar of Russia. She didn't much care for him very much, and overthrew him in a coup. This is, of course, known as Catherine the Great. She wanted to develop Russia, make it comparable to the other countries of Europe. Needed some more economic development. So, especially in the regions of the Volga region, which is a river, and the Black Sea region. In order to do that, she needed workers and farmers. So she reached out to her contacts in Germany, what was then the Holy Roman Empire, and had several million immigrants, several 100,000 immigrants immigrate into those regions. Originally it was the Volga region, and later became the Black Sea region. She issued a manifesto to people who wanted to go there. This manifesto gave them a whole bunch of special privileges that most ordinary Russians did not have. For one thing, they didn't have to be serfs, like a lot of Russians had to be. They were granted freedom of religion. They could speak German. They would pretty much have local autonomy, and they wouldn't have to serve in the military. They came from various places throughout Germany, and where they settled, they tended to segregate by religion. Majority were Lutheran, but not all of them. You had Catholic villages, you had Lutheran villages, Mennonite villages, and some Congregationalist Reform villages as well. They were there for about 100 years. After Catherine passed away, her son, I think it was Alexander I, continued the manifesto, saying, you don't have to, you can basically stay stay in your own area, and we will more or less leave you give you local autonomy. One of the things they really specialized in terms of farming was a crop known as turkey red wheat. That they usually did this usually harvested it with a device called a threshing stone, which was basically this big, more or less this big rock that they would use, and they wouldn't. And in order to pull it, they didn't use horses; they used camels, which is extremely interesting. After Alexander II passed away, his son Alexander II came to power. Alexander II was not nearly as tolerant of the Germans living there as his father and grandmother had been. To the Russians, he was considered quite the democratic reformer. To the Germans, not so much. He rescinded the manifesto because the original manifesto had said you're granted these privileges forever. He said forever meant 100 years. And so began this process of Russification of Germans from Russia. They were being forced to speak German. They were being more or less, maybe not forced to, but heavily encouraged to adopt Orthodoxy. And they had to serve in the military. And starting in the 1870s, a lot of Germans from Russia, from the Black Sea, and from the Volga region began immigrating here to the United States. Originally, they thought it was just going to be not permanent. But then, after Alexander was assassinated by what was the precursor to the Bolsheviks, his son Nicholas II took power. And then the Bolshevik Revolution happened, and Nicholas and his family were assassinated by the Bolsheviks, and the ones who were immigrating to the United States, it found it to be permanent. Originally, when they came, they mostly settled here in the Great Plains region, which is Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, and parts of Colorado. And the reason for that is because the geography was very similar to what they had in Russia. Lincoln was kind of a source destination for a lot of them for that reason, and that's why you have the Russian bottoms in both the north and the south of Lincoln today. When they got here, they were primarily used for farm manual labor in western Colorado western Nebraska and eastern Colorado. They were used primarily in the beet and harvesting industry, where it was common, in fact, to see even kids do that. They would actually take them out of school in order to go harvest the beets with beet harvesting knives. A lot of kids had to repeat grades for that reason, just because they were they were being exploited. As far as Kansas, Nebraska, a lot of them smuggled the turkey red wheat with them in their clothes to the United States and began harvesting it here. However, they also were in places like Illinois. They were primarily used in terms of the Union Pacific Railroad. They were used as manual labor there. Just to go some numbers, I think it was about, I think Kansas, Nebraska both had originally about 8,000 immigrants, and in the Dakotas it was around 10,000. And just as within Russia, they kind of separated. They kind of separated here as well. Most of the Black Sea Germans kind of settled in the Dakotas. With the Volga region, they were primarily in Kansas and Nebraska, and even then they kind of tended to they still separated by religion. In Nebraska, it was mostly Lutherans. In Kansas, it was mostly Catholics. However, things like because of that, the early generations didn't want to talk about everything that had happened, especially after the Bolshevik Revolution, when you saw the deportations and the famines of the 20s and 30s. The deportation started under the Tsars, as did a lot of policies. The gulags actually started under the Tsars, but the Bolsheviks just kind of turned it up a notch. A little bit during the Lenin era, but especially during the Stalin era. They were, during both world wars, they were, the ones that remained were thought to have been a fifth column for the German invasions, and were forcibly deported. The villages that they settled in Russia, in the Black Sea, and the Volga are no longer around today. There's still some are still around. They were mostly deported to Siberia, and there is sizable populations of Germans from Russia, and especially Lutheran populations in Siberia, and some in Kazakhstan. We just recently had an open house where a member of the Siberian Synod, Lutheran Synod from Novosibirsk, which is the capital of Siberia, came and visited our facility. It was actually pretty cool. So we still try to maintain as many connections with the old country as possible. Because for the longest time, people here didn't want to talk about it because of the trauma they had endured. But starting in the 60s and 70s, kind of the children kind of wanted to kind of rediscover their heritage, and so they formed the American Historical Society of Germans from Russia to study everything that happened and to preserve the history, the heritage, and the culture. Like I said, originally we were found in Colorado, but we later relocated to Lincoln, just because that was where the majority of, not the majority, but a lot of settlers settled. There are two, along with us, there's also another organization, the GRHS, which is the Germans from Russia Historical Society in the Dakotas. They primarily specialize in the Black Sea, while we primarily specialize in the Volga region. Although, like, we have more Black Sea resources than they have Volga resources, is what we like to say. With our organization, we try to preserve as much as possible. We have a museum that we're very, very proud of at our headquarters. We work a lot with not only UNL, but also the Nebraska Historical Society, and also other institutions. Like I mentioned, we also, right across from us is a Lutheran church called Frieden's, and you can definitely tell that it is a German from Russian church because it has the kind of the Eastern Dome. You can definitely tell, like, the influence that Eastern churches have, because the kind of the Orthodox dome that a lot of churches tend to have. Currently, we just had our first ever virtual convention for all of our members. We have about 3,000. It was very, very successful. Usually we have them yearly, and we have them in person, but because of COVID, we did not. So we decided to try something different, and it was pretty successful. We had scholars of the subject. We had scholars of the subject from all over the world. In Germany, I think there was one from Russia, one from Argentina, give lectures and seminars to our members. We also publish books on the subject. I've brought a couple here today. This is kind of the primer on the subject. It's called From Catherine to Khrushchev. It was written in the 70s, but it's still prevalent. A lot of the information is still prevalent today. Just to get the Nebraska influence, this is called Those Who Came to Sudden. This is about the German-Russian settlement to Sudden, Nebraska. And this is one of our most popular books called Kochen, which is a German-Russian cookbook where it teaches all types of Kochen recipes, which is a kind of pastry. And also Bierox, which is a type of bread, is also very, very, very popular. Like I said, we are the disseminators of the culture. And so another thing we promote is a thing called Dutch Hop, which is basically, I think the closest you could compare it to is polka, where we'll have events, and we work with local PBS stations to kind of promote it. Like I said, we just reached a deal with a local PBS station for them to promote not only our cookbook but the Dutch Hop as well. I think here, like I said, that's kind of just an overview of our organization, kind of the history locally. I guess I could take some questions.
Why did they come to the United States instead of going back to Germany?
Some did go to Germany. Many did go to Germany. They came primarily to the United States because, well, for one thing, when they went to Germany, they had discrimination there as well because they thought they weren't quite German enough. Because they thought they were basically culturally Russian. Even though among the Germans in Russia, between the Black Sea and the Volga, there was significant cultural differences between the two because they've been there 100 years. There's also other places in the east, not quite in Russia where Germans lived. There was a place called Bessarabia, which is in Romania, and then there were significant German populations, the Baltic states as well.
When I was on providing education in Turkmenistan, which the Russians had control of as part of the Russians put the people in these towns. This is a town that's going to be built like this division, this thing. I asked the people, I said, I didn't know the Russians were so organized that they would do this.
Yeah.
And they said, it's the Germans from Russia.
Yeah.
It's the Germans that are still in Russia that are the ones that, and from my time in Germany, that's how organization is thing. And so it's still, some of them stayed in Russia and are still present and impactful in Russia in terms of their thoughts.
Yeah, there's several prominent Russian politicians who are of German ancestry who lived there. Like I said, Russia's a very big country. It's very diverse. And you were saying about the immigration. Yeah, a lot came to. Many actually went to Latin America, Argentina and Chile in particular. We actually have a branch in Argentina.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
He talks about bringing red wheat to America. And that's the Germans from Russia, particularly into Kansas. And one of those great-grandchildren, John Schmidt, became the Nebraska wheat breeder, world-renowned wheat breeder. And you enjoy bread today because of John Schmidt bread, hard-red winter wheat, brought from the steppes of Russia to central Kansas and now grown all over Nebraska and Kansas, and was a significant factor in the United States of developing that as a crop for us. So I just mentioned that one of those heirs was great help to us.
Yeah, they actually smuggled it in their clothes. Like they when they came over here, they confiscated it. Immigration could be kind of difficult because it's like before the 1920s. Before the 1920s, it was a bit. You had a lot of immigration, but the thing is, there were significant limits in terms of immigration. Like they scanned for diseases. You had to have a relative here already, stuff like that. Or otherwise they might not let you in. But the thing is, there was ways around it. Usually they would, if people couldn't get in, they would usually go up through Canada and sneak in that way. But the thing with what really hurt them in the 20s was you had an immigration restrictionist movement that really kind of limited it, which prevented a lot of people from getting in and made immigration much more restrictive, and that's why a lot of people in Russia couldn't get out. To try and solve the issue, you had an organization in the United States called the Volga Relief Society, which we have most of the records on at our organization. Even though they had much more restrictive immigration policies, they were able to get a lot of people out before the Bolsheviks got them.
Was that all during about World War I? Is that about the time?
About that time, yeah. That was also a major motivation because you had tensions with Germany and like with the First World War, and so they were going to be forced to fight, not only fight other Germans, but they were also kind of thought of as being a fifth column and were deported. I guess you could kind of compare it to like the Japanese internment in American history, in a way. I think it was with the First World War, I think it was like Vladimir Putin who said, like the Russians had the distinction of being the only side that surrendered, but yeah, happened to be on the winning side.
France surrendered in every war.
Yeah, that's true.
I have been to the museum in Lincoln. My wife grew up in that area, and if you ever have a chance, go there. It's very interesting. You can spend hours reading about it, seeing all the different things in the history of it. It's well worth it.
We have one of the premier research libraries in probably in the world in regards to this subject. People come from all over to utilize our resources. We don't just have like church histories, family histories, microfilm. We also have, but we also have family surname charts, which can trace family lineages all the way back to their ancestral villages and originally back to Germany as well. They were mostly commissioned by a Russian professor by the name of Igor Plevy. And we actually published several of his books. He's not German Russian, but he is an expert on the subject. Unfortunately, as far as we know, he's been gotten in trouble recently with Russian authorities because they don't like him they don't like him working with the West, basically. And that's been an issue, is trying to get records out of Russia, is because the Russians are very protective of their records and do not want to share it with anyone, especially Westerners. That's why a lot of our census records kind of tend to end in the 1857, 1858, even though immigration started in the 1870s, is because that's just all we could get. So even though the immigrants won't be listed on those records, their parents will.